The screen flickers to life, capturing the chaos unfolding under the harsh glow of flashing red and blue lights. Karen Whitmore, president of the Crestwood Estates HOA, stands at the barricade, her face twisted in rage, barking orders at the officers, blocking her path. "You can't do this! This is an unlawful act of defiance. You're blocking emergency access. This is illegal!" she shrieks, her voice shrill with desperation. The camera pans, revealing me, standing smugly beside a towering wrought iron gate, its freshly installed security system gleaming under the streetlights. Bolted to its bars, a Federal Protection Notice and a National Historic Landmark plaque gleam like a death sentence. I cross my arms, tilting my head ever so slightly, letting the moment sink in before delivering the final blow. "Actually, Karen," I say, my voice dripping with satisfaction, "I can, and I just did." The HOA board members behind her stare wide-eyed, realization dawning as their entire world crumbles before them. Karen sputters, shaking her head in disbelief as if sheer willpower alone can undo what's been done, but it's too late. The war is over and she has lost. I turn to the camera, a slow grin spreading across my face. Let me tell you how my land, the very thing they tried to erase, just became their worst nightmare. A few weeks earlier, my family estate had stood as it had for over 150 years, long before Crestwood Estates ever existed. It wasn't just a farm. It was a legacy, a piece of history, passed down from my grandfather, preserved with care and love. The red barn, weathered but strong, held stories in its beams, memories in its walls. It was more than just wood and nails. It was a testament to resilience, to survival. But Karen and her HO minions didn't see it that way. To them, my land was an eyesore, a blemish on their pristine, sterile paradise of overpriced beige clones. They didn't care about history, they cared about property values, and in their eyes my farm had to go. It started with letters, cold, impersonal, and filled with demands disguised as polite requests. The HOA had reviewed my property and found that my historic barn clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. They suggested I demolish it, or at least renovate it to better fit their community standards. I laughed the first time I read one. HOA rules didn't apply to me. My land wasn't part of their little fiefdom. They had no authority here. But Karen was not the kind of woman who took no for an answer. The fines started rolling in next. $500 a day for non-compliance, a charge for unauthorized structures, a penalty for obstructing community development. Every notice felt like a declaration of war, an attempt to grind me down, to bully me into submission. When that didn't work, the visits began. HOA members, dressed like suburban enforcers, hovered at the edge of my property, snapping photos, whispering into their phones. They measured fence lines, took notes, plotted their next move. Then came the demolition order. I'll never forget the moment I read it, how my hands clenched, the letters so hard the paper crumpled. Your structure poses a safety risk and will be removed by force if necessary. They were planning to bulldoze my barn, my history, my home. That was when I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about principle, about standing up to the kind of people who thought they could rewrite history with a clipboard and a superiority complex. Fury propelled me straight to the HOA office, where Karen sat behind a pristine white desk, sipping tea like a queen on her throne. I slammed the letter onto her desk, my voice shaking with anger. "You can't do this!" Karen barely looked up. She took another slow sip of tea, setting the cup down delicately before offering me a tight-lipped smile. "You could always modernize the property," she mused. "A fresh coat of paint, a white picket fence. Maybe then we'd reconsider." My nails dug into my palms. "You're threatening to destroy my land because it doesn't fit your aesthetic?" Karen leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper, her smile never fading. "It's nothing personal," she said, sweetly, "but rules are rules." That night, I went home shaking with rage, my mind racing. This wasn't just petty HOA politics anymore, this was war. I pored over security footage, watching HOA members trespass onto my land in the dead of night, measuring, planning, scheming. But then something unexpected happened. My aggressive little goat, Buckshot, decided he had had enough. The next morning, one of the HOA lackeys hobbled away from my property with a torn pant leg and a bruised ego. It was a small victory, but it wasn't enough. Then, a whisper of hope. A neighbor, an old man who had lived in the area long before Crestwood was even built, pulled me aside. "You know," he said, his voice low, "your farm might qualify as a historic landmark. If you make it official, they can never touch it." And just like that, I had my nuclear option. If they wanted war, I was about to go nuclear. The war had officially begun. Karen and her HOA weren't backing down, and neither was I. The letters turned into fines, piling up faster than I could throw them away. $500 a day for non-compliance, notices for unauthorized structures, absurd warnings about how my barn was a public nuisance. It was laughable. Their rules didn't apply to me, but that didn't stop them from trying to enforce them anyway. At first I ignored them, but then the county zoning board got involved. Turns out Karen had filed multiple complaints, claiming my farm was violating everything from environmental regulations to community aesthetic laws. Health inspectors, zoning officials, even the fire department started showing up at my gate, all with the same confused expression when they realized nothing was actually wrong. They all left empty-handed, but it was clear Karen was trying to drown me in bureaucracy. She didn't need the law on her side, just enough harassment to wear me down. Then she got bolder. One morning my security cameras caught a group of HOA members standing at my property line, snapping pictures measuring my fence. That night, I saw flashlights moving along my barn, figures creeping closer, whispering. The next morning another letter arrived, this time an official demolition notice. My heart pounded as I read the words, "Your structure poses a safety risk and will be removed by force if necessary." They were planning to bulldoze my barn, my history, my home. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just petty HOA nonsense anymore. They weren't going to stop until they wiped my farm off the map. I needed to fight back, but I needed a way to win. Storming into the HOA office with legal documents hadn't worked. Arguing with Karen had only made her dig in harder. I needed something bigger, something that would shut them down permanently. That's when fate intervened. A neighbor, an old-timer who had lived in the area long before Crestwood Estates even existed, pulled me aside as I was fixing a fence. "You know," he said, glancing around as if making sure no HOA spies were nearby, "your farm might qualify as a historic landmark. If you make it official, they can never touch it." I froze. He explained that any property with documented historical significance could be placed under federal protection, shielding it from demolition, rezoning, and most importantly, the iron grip of the HOA. My mind started racing. My grandfather had always talked about the farm's history, about how our land had been used during the Civil War. I had thought it was just family lore, but if there was proof... I didn't waste a second. That night I dug through old records, dusty chests, faded documents stored away in my grandfather's study. What I found nearly made my heart stop. A ledger dated from the 1860s, detailing provisions supplied to Union soldiers. There were names, dates, transactions, proof that my barn had been a military supply depot. If this held up, it meant my farm wasn't just land, it was a piece of American history. Meanwhile, Karen was still pressing forward. The fines kept coming, each more ridiculous than the last. One claimed my livestock violated neighborhood harmony, as if my cows were ruining their suburban paradise. Another accused me of unsightly structures, despite the fact that my barn had been standing long before any of their cookie-cutter houses existed. Then, one day, I walked outside and saw a survey team on my property. They weren't even trying to be sneaky anymore. A crew in safety vests was measuring the perimeter of my barn. When I confronted them, one of them smugly handed me a work order. "Demolition scheduled, HO." I saw red. "Over my dead Maudie?" I growled, snatching the paper and ripping it in half. I immediately called my lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no legal right to touch my property, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try. That night, I reinforced my security cameras, floodlights, motion sensors. I wasn't taking any chances. Sure enough, at 3 a.m. the alarms blared to life. My cameras caught 2 HOA members sneaking onto my land, spray cans in hand, probably planning to mark the barn for demolition. The second they stepped too close, My motion-activated floodlights blasted on, turning the whole field into a crime scene. The trespassers let out terrified yelps, tripping over the fence before bolting back into the darkness. By morning, I wasn't just filing a police report, I was sending the footage straight to the local news. The headline? "For processing on historic land. The trespassers let out terrified yelps, tripping over the fence before bolting back into the darkness. By morning, I wasn't just filing a police report, I was sending the footage straight to the local news. The headline? Hoa Karen, caught trespassing on historic land. Karen wanted a war. She had just declared it, and I was about to finish it. The moment I sent the footage of the HOA trespassing on my land to the local news, everything changed. The town was outraged. People who had been indifferent before were now furious, calling the HOA a bunch of power-hungry tyrants. Even some residents of Crestwood Estates who had previously supported Karen started questioning if they were backing the right side. But I wasn't done yet. If I wanted to shut down the HOA's attacks once and for all, I needed something that would make them completely powerless against me. That's when I went all in on making my farm a National Historic Landmark. If I could get that designation, it wouldn't just protect my land from demolition. It would strip the HOA of any legal standing to ever touch it again. I spent 2 days straight buried in research, poring through historical archives, old land records, and my grandfather's dusty collection of family documents. Every piece of information I found pointed to something big, something the HOA never saw coming. My great-great-grandfather's records from the Civil War era detailed how our barn had once been a supply depot for Union soldiers. This wasn't just family folklore, it was written proof that my land was a part of American history. The real breakthrough came when I found a forgotten ledger from the 1860s listing provisions, supplies, and correspondence with local militias. This wasn't just a farm, it had once been a critical piece of a wartime supply chain. If I could get an expert to verify the authenticity of these records, I'd have everything I needed to obliterate the HOS claims over my land. That's when I called in Dr. Weller, a historian renowned for uncovering lost pieces of American history. The moment he arrived at my farm, he was buzzing with excitement. He ran his hands over the barn's beams, examined the original foundation, and even found woodwork carvings that matched Civil War-era supply markings. His voice was practically shaking when he turned to me. "This isn't just old," he murmured. "This is irreplaceable." Over the next few days, he cross-referenced my documents with state archives, and then finally, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The land had been officially registered as a military supply station in the late 1800s. That meant one thing. The HOA had just lost. With the evidence in hand, I immediately filed my application for National Historic Landmark status. The process was a bureaucratic nightmare, multiple government agencies, layers of paperwork, site evaluations, and endless legal hoops to jump through. But I was relentless. Every step forward was another shield against Karen's tyranny, and while I worked through the system, she kept escalating. The HOA doubled down on the harassment campaign, sending out new fines, more legal threats, and even more absurd complaints. One notice claimed my barn's red paint was an eyesore and needed to be a more neutral color. Another accused me of excessive noise pollution, as if my rooster crowing in the morning was somehow an act of rebellion. Then, one afternoon, I walked outside and saw something that made my blood boil. A crew of HOI hired workers were surveying the perimeter of my barn, measuring the land as if they were preparing for demolition. I stormed over, demanding to know what the hell was going on. One of the workers handed me a document with a smug grin. "Demolition scheduled. HOA approved." I nearly tore the paper in half. "The HOA doesn't own this land," I snarled, "and they sure as hell don't have the right to demolish anything." The worker just shrugged. "Not our problem. We were told the structure violates community safety standards, so we're here to assess for removal." That was it. That was the moment I decided to end this for good. That night, I reinforced my defenses. I installed motion-activated floodlights, alarms, security cameras, the works. If they wanted to sneak onto my land again, I was going to make sure the whole damn neighborhood saw it. And sure enough, at 3 a.m., the system sprang to life. My cameras caught 2 HOA board members creeping onto my land, spray cans in hand, likely planning to mark the barn for destruction. The second they stepped too close, my floodlights exploded on, lighting up the night like a crime scene. The trespassers let out yells of panic, stumbling over my fence before bolting into the dark like cockroaches. But they weren't getting away this time. By sunrise, I had already filed a police report and sent the footage straight to the local news. The fallout was instant. The town erupted with outrage. People were furious that the HOA had gone this far. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support from neighbors, local reporters, even strangers who had their own horror stories about HOA tyranny. But the best call came from my lawyer. "You're gonna love this," he said, barely containing his amusement. "Turns out the main road leading into Crestwood Estates, it technically runs through your property, and if your farm is officially designated as a historic landmark," his voice trailed off, letting the implications sink in. I nearly dropped my phone. The HOA had spent months trying to erase me. Now I had the legal right to erase them. By the time Karen got wind of my plan, it was too late. The first step of my National Historic Landmark application had been approved, and my farm was officially listed on the state's historic registry. The HOA was in full-blown panic mode. They scrambled to stop me, but their desperation only made things worse. They bribed local officials, filed bogus petitions, even staged a ridiculous town hall meeting to try and turn the neighborhood against me. It backfired spectacularly. At that meeting, one by one, my neighbors stood up and spoke out. A retired veteran shook his head and said, "I've lived here for 20 years, and that farm has been here longer than any of us. If anything, the HOA is the real nuisance." The room erupted in applause. Other residents began sharing stories of the insane fines, the petty harassment, the relentless HOA rules that had made their lives miserable. Karen turned beet red with embarrassment. That night, the HOA president resigned. But Karen, she refused to go down without a fight. The next morning she was at my doorstep, her face twisted in fury. "You have no idea what you're doing," she spat. "This little stunt of yours is going to ruin the entire neighborhood." I just smiled. "Funny," I said, leaning against my fence. "That's exactly what I was thinking about you." I shut the door in her face. A week later, my National Historic Landmark status was officially approved. The HOA was done for. But I wasn't finished yet, because now I had the power to cut them off from their own neighborhood. The final blow was coming, and Karen didn't even see it yet. While she was busy scrambling to find any last-minute loophole to stop me, I had already set my masterstroke in motion. The moment my farm was officially recognized as a National Historic Landmark, the game changed. The HOA no longer had any legal claim over my land. No fines, no demolition orders, no rules. They were powerless. But then my lawyer dropped a bombshell. "You remember how I told you the main road into Crestwood Estates technically runs through your property?" I nodded, already grinning because I knew where this was going. "Well," he continued, "now that your land is federally protected, you can petition to restrict public access, meaning, if approved, the HOA won't just lose their power over you, they'll lose access to their own damn neighborhood." I sat back in my chair, letting those words sink in, and then I laughed. Karen had spent months trying to erase me. Now I was about to erase her entire kingdom. I wasted no time filing the paperwork. The moment the HOA got wind of what I was doing, they lost their minds. Panic spread like wildfire. Karen was calling emergency HOA meetings, rallying homeowners, desperately trying to stop what was already too far in motion. They petitioned the county, claiming I was endangering the community by cutting off the road. But the law was clear. Federally protected land trumps HOA regulations. They had no authority anymore. The best part? The county officials were sick of them too. The endless complaints, the bogus fines, the constant legal drama. Everyone had had enough. A week later, the approval came through. I now had full legal control over the only road leading into Crestwood Estates. The very next morning, I made my move. I hired a crew to install a massive wrought iron gate right across the entrance, complete with a state-funded security system and a federal protection sign bolted to the front. And just for good measure, I added a National Historic Landmark plaque, officially sealing Karen's fate By nightfall, the road was closed. Crestwood Estates was locked out of its own neighborhood. The reaction was instant chaos. The next morning, Karen showed up at the barricade, screaming bloody murder. Police lights flashed as she argued with the county officers, her face red with rage, demanding that they remove the gate. "You can't do this. This is an illegal act of defiance. You're blocking emergency access." "This is against the law." But the officers didn't budge. One of them gestured to the signs. "Actually, ma'am, this land is now federally protected. He has every legal right to restrict access." Karen's face drained of color. She turned to me, her hands shaking, as I stood next to the gate, arms crossed, watching her world crumble. You don't know what you've done," she stammered. I smiled. "Oh, Karen, I know exactly what I've done." Behind her, HOA board members stood in stunned silence, realizing they had been completely and utterly outplayed. Some of the homeowners, the ones who had blindly followed Karen's crusade, were furious. They had spent months cheering her on, convinced she was protecting the neighborhood, and now, because of her, they were completely trapped. The only way in or out of Crestwood Estates was now a 15-minute detour through an old back road. Home values destroyed, Karen's reputation in ruins, and the HOA dead. The next day, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, but it was too late. Homeowners were livid. People who had once been afraid to speak out were now openly blaming Karen for ruining their lives. A petition was launched to dissolve the HOA entirely, and within a week, it had hundreds of signatures. Karen tried one last desperate move. She attempted to sue me, claiming I had manipulated historical status to destroy the community. My lawyer laughed when he read the lawsuit. "This is pathetic. This won't even make it past the first hearing, right?" "Oh, I know," I replied, grinning. "But let's make sure the whole town knows, too." I leaked the lawsuit to the local news. The headline, "HOA sues local farmer for protecting historic land." It went viral. News stations picked it up. Legal experts mocked it on TV. The internet tore them apart. Crestwood Estates became a national joke, and Karen, who once ruled with absolute authority, was now the most hated woman in town. A week later, the lawsuit was laughed out of court. The judge didn't just dismiss it. He scolded the HOA for wasting the court's time. "This isn't a legal dispute," he said, shaking his head. "This is a temper tantrum." And just like that, the HOA crumbled. The treasurer resigned first. Then 2 more board members stepped down. Without leadership, without power, without Karen's iron grip of control, the remaining homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA completely. No more fines, no more petty rules, no more HOA. The day my road restriction officially went into effect, I threw a celebration. The entire town was invited except for Karen. We had barbecue, live music, drinks, and I even gave tours of my newly protected historic farm. By the end of the night, someone had put up a brand new sign at my gate. "Welcome to Mitchell Farms, a National Historic Landmark, Ho-Free since 2025. And just like that, Karen had lost everything. The story of HOA Karen isn't just a satisfying tale of revenge. It's a powerful reminder of property rights, personal freedom, and standing up to overreach. In today's America, there will always be individuals or organizations that try to exert control over you, whether it's an HOA, local government, or corporate policies. But as this story proves, knowing your rights and using the law to your advantage is the ultimate power move. Know your legal rights. If you own property, take the time to understand zoning laws, HOA regulations, and your legal protections. Many people assume they have no choice but to comply with unreasonable demands when, in reality, they have more power than they think. Don't let authority intimidate you. Bullies often rely on people backing down out of fear or confusion, whether it's an HOA trying to control your land or a company enforcing unfair policies. Remember, knowledge is power. Fight smart, not just hard. Sometimes the best revenge isn't direct confrontation. It's using the system against those who abuse it. Whether it's turning property into a protected landmark or making an HAO regret their actions, strategy wins wars. Your turn. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or an organization that tried to overstep their boundaries? Do you think legal knowledge is the key to fighting back against unfair rules? Drop your thoughts in the comments.